There is a version of you that no longer exists, not because life destroyed you, not because you gave up, but because you gave everything, every last piece of loyalty, every last act of forgiveness, every last extension of trust to people who were quietly collecting it without ever intending to return it. And one day, without any announcement, without any funeral, that version of you simply stopped existing. You did not notice it immediately. That is the terrifying part. You were still walking, still showing up for people. But something essential was gone, something warm. Something that used to believe in people before they proved themselves. Something that used to love without calculating the risk first. That part died, quietly, while you were busy being loyal and nobody saw it happen. People think emotional death looks dramatic. They imagine a person collapsing visibly, crying loudly, screaming for help. But the truth is most deep wounds happen in complete silence. You sat across from people who were slowly emptying you, and you smiled. You answered messages from people who only reached out when they needed something, and you responded with full effort every single time. You stayed. You explained yourself calmly. You forgave things that should have ended the connection immediately, not because you were weak, because loyalty was not a strategy for you. It was just who you were. That is what makes this kind of death different from ordinary heartbreak. Ordinary heartbreak happens when love ends. This happens when loyalty kills the person giving it. And the strange thing about being deeply loyal is that it takes a very long time to break. You do not break after the first betrayal. You find an explanation. You give another chance. You tell yourself everyone makes mistakes. You do not break after the second time either. You go quieter. You become a little more careful, but you stay. Because leaving feels like failure to someone who believes in people. Because you were not raised to abandon. You were raised to endure, so you endure and endure and endure until one morning you wake up and realize the endurance itself has become the wound. You know what loyalty does to a person who gives it to the wrong people? It teaches them to disappear slowly, not all at once, in small pieces. First, the excitement goes. You used to look forward to certain conversations, certain connections, certain people. Then one day you realize you stopped feeling that anticipation without noticing when it left. Then the openness goes. You used to share things naturally. Your thoughts, your fears, your plans, your strange 2 a.m. observations about life. Then slowly you start editing yourself before speaking, calculating what is safe to say, protecting pieces of yourself from people who were once supposed to be safe. Then the hope goes, not dramatically. Just quietly one night, you stop imagining a future where these connections feel different. You stop waiting for them to show up the way you showed up. And something in your chest finally accepts the truth it had been resisting for a very long time. That acceptance feels like peace for a moment. Then you realize it is not peace, it is numbness. And numbness is just pain that learned how to go quiet. People will say you changed, and they are right. But what they never ask is what changed you. They notice the coldness, but not the 1,000 moments of warmth that were ignored before it arrived. They notice you stopped trying, but not how many times you tried while receiving nothing back. They notice you became distant, but not the specific night you decided that distance was the only thing left that belonged entirely to you. They see the result. They never witness the process, and the process is where the real story lives. Because here's what the process actually looks like. It looks like you defending someone to other people who could already see what you refused to see. It looks like you making excuses for behavior that embarrassed your own intelligence. It looks like you lying awake at night crafting explanations for why someone treated you carelessly because accepting the simpler truth felt too devastating. It looks like you shrinking yourself to make someone else comfortable. laughing less loudly, sharing less honestly, wanting less openly, becoming smaller and smaller until one day you look in a mirror and barely recognize the person looking back. That person is not who you were before the loyalty, before the giving, before the staying. And what hurts most is not the betrayal itself. What hurts is realizing how long you knew. Deep inside, somewhere beneath the explanations and the forgiveness and the endless patience, you knew. You felt the imbalance early. You felt the weight of being the only one carrying the connection. You felt the loneliness of being surrounded by people who claimed to care, but disappeared the moment caring became inconvenient. You felt all of it. You just loved harder to silence the feeling. That is what loyal people do. They do not leave when something feels wrong. They invest more. They try harder. They give more generously. As if enough loyalty can transform someone who simply does not value it. It cannot. And eventually that truth stops being avoidable. God sees something that most people miss entirely. He sees the private version of every person. Not the performance, not the face shown to crowds, not the carefully constructed story told after the damage was done. He sees the moment they chose selfishness while you were choosing sacrifice. He sees the intention behind every warm smile that was hiding cold calculation. He sees every time you were used and called it love, every time you were drained and called it friendship, every time you were manipulated and called it connection. He saw what happened when nobody else was watching. And that matters more than any applause they collected from people who only heard the edited version of events. So do not panic when they seem comfortable. Do not exhaust yourself trying to prove what God already witnessed in detail. Some people escape your words. They escape your evidence. They escape your tears. But no human being has ever escaped a conscience that remembers everything, and no human being has ever fully escaped the version of themselves that appears in silence. Late at night, when the distractions stop working, when the noise runs out, that is where God meets people with the truth they spent years performing around. And that meeting is not always loud. Sometimes it is just a heaviness in the chest that no achievement can remove. A restlessness that no relationship can quiet. An emptiness wearing expensive clothes and a convincing smile. That is not freedom. That is a sentence. And you, meanwhile, you who gave everything, you who stayed too long, you who loved people who were quietly laughing at your sincerity behind their warmth, you are being rebuilt, slowly, painfully. But rebuilt because here is what nobody explains about losing the loyal version of yourself. It is not only loss, it is also education. The most brutal, most expensive education a human soul can receive. You learn things in the aftermath of too much loyalty that comfortable people never discover. You learn the difference between someone who loves your presence and someone who loves your usefulness. You learn that consistency is rarer than kindness, because anyone can be kind on a good day. Consistency during inconvenience reveals character. You learn that the people who speak loudest about loyalty are often the ones who understand it least. You learn to watch patterns instead of listening to words, because words are easy. Words cost nothing. Patterns cost comfort, and most dishonest people are not willing to be uncomfortable for you. You learn all of this, and it changes the way you move through the world permanently. Some people mistake this change for bitterness. They see you becoming quieter and assume you became angry. They see you becoming more selective and assume you became arrogant. They see you protecting your energy and call it coldness. But bitterness chases people. What you developed does not chase anything. It simply stops running toward things that were never running toward you. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom wearing the face of exhaustion. And the two can look similar from a distance. But they feel entirely different from the inside. Bitterness wants revenge. What you carry wants rest. Bitterness rehearses old pain daily. What you carry is trying to set it down. Bitterness needs the person who hurt you to suffer before healing can begin. What you carry is slowly understanding that your healing cannot depend on their consequences. Because waiting for justice before allowing yourself peace gives the person who hurt you a second form of power over your life. And they already took enough. There is a strange grief that comes after the loyal version of you dies. Because you do not only mourn the relationships, you mourn yourself. You mourn the version of you that walked into rooms with open energy. The version that shared things freely without calculating who was safe first. The version that believed effort was always worth giving. The version that trusted people's kindness without scanning for the hidden cost underneath it. That version of you was not naive. That version of you was actually rare. Genuinely rare. Because most people protect themselves instinctively. Most people love with conditions built in from the beginning. Most people calculate before they commit. You did not. You loved first and thought later. In a world full of people performing loyalty while practicing selfishness privately, that made you vulnerable in ways you did not fully understand. And people can sense that kind of openness. Some people are drawn to it because it makes them feel safe. But some people are drawn to it for a different reason entirely, because open hearts are easier to take. From you were not stupid, you were not weak. You were simply operating from a different set of values than the people who drained you. You believed in reciprocity as something natural, not negotiated. You believed that how you treated people was how they would eventually treat you back. You believed loyalty was a language everyone fluent in love could speak. But some people never learned that language. Or they learned it and chose not to speak it with you specifically. Because you were too reliable to lose, but not important enough to truly protect. You were the person they could always return to, always depend on, always extract patience from. And they mistook your consistency for inexhaustibility. They kept drawing from a well they never once thought to refill, until it ran dry. And when it ran dry, they were confused, genuinely confused. Because they had grown so accustomed to your endless supply of loyalty that your finally having nothing left to give felt like a betrayal of them. Do you understand how backwards that is? You gave everything. You emptied yourself completely, and when the emptiness became visible, they responded as if you had done something wrong. As if your depletion was your failure rather than their consequence. That kind of confusion is not innocent. That is what happens when someone has been comfortable taking from you for so long that your absence of giving feels like an attack. And maybe that was the final education. Watching them react to your emptiness with more demands instead of remorse. Watching them frame your exhaustion as your problem. Watching them replace you quickly with another open heart to drain. Because people like that do not change the behavior. They change the person they practice it on. And somewhere right now there is another sincere soul giving them the same loyalty you once did. Explaining away the same imbalances. Making the same quiet sacrifices, carrying the same invisible weight, and eventually experiencing the same quiet death of the trusting version of themselves. That cycle is one of the saddest things in this world, but listen carefully. The version of you that died was not your only version. It was one season of you, a necessary season, a season that taught you things no comfortable life could have delivered. And the version of you being built in the aftermath is not broken, it is armored, not in a cold way, not in a way that prevents love, but in a way that requires love to prove itself before receiving access to your deepest places. That is not damage, that is discernment. And discernment is one of the most valuable things a human soul can develop, because discernment does not prevent connection. It prevents the wrong connections from consuming your life. It filters out people who want access to your loyalty without earning it. It protects the warmth you still have inside you from being handed to people who will only misuse it again. And you do still have warmth, even after everything. Even after the coldness that settled in when the giving finally stopped, the warmth is still there underneath it. Quieter now, more careful now. But present God did not waste your loyalty, even when people did. Every sacrifice you made that went unreciprocated, every time you stayed when leaving would have been easier, every time you forgave something that deserved consequence, every night you lay awake, wondering if you were the problem when you were actually just the one carrying the solution for people who refused to participate in their own growth. None of that disappeared into nothing. It was witnessed. It was recorded somewhere more permanent than human memory, and it shaped you into someone with a depth of character that people who were never truly tested simply do not possess. That depth is not comfortable to carry. It is heavy, thick, and lonely sometimes, because people who have been through the kind of silent destruction that comes from excessive loyalty often find it difficult to fully explain themselves to people who haven't experienced it. Vic, you can sense something is different about you, something more serious, something more careful, something that does not fully relax in spaces that once felt natural. And that difference can feel like isolation. But it is not isolation, Vic. It is elevation, not the loud kind, not the kind people celebrate publicly, the quiet kind, the kind where you no longer need certain things you once thought were essential, Vic. You no longer need approval from people who withheld it as a control mechanism. You no longer need to explain yourself to people who decided your worth before you opened your mouth, Vic. You no longer need the validation of staying in connections that were slowly removing pieces of your identity. Those needs quietly left when the loyal version of you transformed, Vic. And in their absence, you discovered something more valuable than all of them combined. You discovered what it feels like to protect yourself. And for someone who spent years protecting everyone else first, that feeling is extraordinary, Vic. Strange at first, almost guilty at first, because you spent so long prioritizing others that prioritizing yourself felt selfish. But it is not selfish, it is survival. And eventually survival becomes something softer, Vic. Eventually survival becomes preference. And eventually preference becomes peace, real peace. Not the performed peace of someone pretending they are fine. Not the temporary peace of a distraction working long enough to quiet the noise, Vic. Actual internal stillness. The kind where you can sit alone without feeling attacked by your own thoughts. The kind where you can remember painful things without bleeding from the memory the way you once did, Vic. The kind where you stop needing the people who hurt you to understand what they did before you allow yourself to heal from it. That peace arrives slowly. It does not announce itself, Vic. One morning you simply notice the chest is not as tight as it used to be. One evening you realize you went several hours without replaying a painful memory. One night you sleep without fighting anything. Small signs, quiet signs, Vic. But signs that the soul is doing what it was designed to do even after experiencing things it was never designed to absorb. It is healing. Imperfect, non-linear, sometimes going backwards before moving forward again, but healing, Vic. And one day, not today, maybe not soon, but one day you will look at the version of you that died and feel something unexpected. Not only grief, gratitude. Because that version of you, as painful as the losing of it was, led you here. To a place where you know your own value without needing anyone to confirm it. To a place where loyalty is something you give to people who demonstrate they can carry it carefully. To a place where love is not something you perform endlessly, hoping someone eventually notices. To a place where your presence is something you protect, instead of distribute freely to anyone who asks. The version of you that died from too much loyalty was not the end of your story. It was the end of your innocence. And while innocence lost is always grieved, what replaces it when you survive the process with your humanity intact is something rarer: wisdom, earned the hard way, carried quietly, and worth every painful step that led here.